A ferry guided Chris Vaugh back to his hometown of Kitsap County. A retired U.S. Army sergeant, he carried his retirement in an Army-issued duffel bag, unmistakable to all. Heading straight from the port to Hamilton lumber mills, hope turned to disappointment as he discovered its closure. His plan to seek work there dashed, and he pondered his next move. That's when the sheriff, noticing his concern, offered help. Inquiring about the mill, Chris learned it had shut down 3 years prior, with the town's main draw now being the casino. Recognizing Chris's service-marked bag, the sheriff offered him a ride home as a token of gratitude. Accepting the offer, Chris received an election pamphlet before the sheriff departed. Welcomed by his older sister donning her EMT uniform, Chris was taken aback. Her joyful embrace was followed by calls to their parents, equally thrilled at his return after 8 long years away. His mother inquired about the duration of his stay, to which Chris replied that he was home for good. Amidst dinner, his sister introduced Chris to her son, Pete, who was merely a toddler when Chris left. However, their reunion was marred by Pete's disrespectful and rebellious attitude. Curiosity about Chris's Army service led to triggering questions, to which Chris offered limited details, identifying himself as a sergeant. Dismissing Chris as a mere grunt, Pete left to meet his friends. Pete feels highly agitated by his uncle's presence since he had vacated his room, which originally belonged to Chris long before Pete moved in. When Chris returned home, his plan to work at the mill fell through due to its closure. However, this didn't mean Chris remained idle. Instead, he focused on renovating his home. Engaged in repairing his porch stairs, Chris receives a pleasant surprise as his childhood best friend, Ray, arrives in his RV. Their reunion is filled with joy, and Ray catches Chris up on his life since Chris's departure. He shares about delving into music and getting involved in vices, ultimately leading to his arrest for breaking and entering. Feeling empathy for Ray, Chris learned of his sobriety journey. As Saturday beckoned, Ray's prompt to engage in rugby interrupted their conversation. Heading to the field, Chris reunited with old friends, among them Jay Hamilton, now a tycoon owning both the defunct Hamilton Mills and the town's casino. Their teams clashed in a heated match, with Jay resorting to foul play, instructing a teammate to target Chris's weakened left knee, a college injury. Despite the unfair tactics, Jay's team emerged victorious. Pretending concern for Chris's injury, Jay extended an olive branch, inviting him to the casino, offering free drinks and VIP treatment as recompense. Chris agreed, planning to attend later that evening. Resting after the game, Chris and Ray were interrupted by Pete, who wished Chris better luck next time. Observing Pete secretly smoking in the bleachers with friends, Chris issued a stern warning against repeating the act. That evening, Chris and his friends decided to visit the casino, where they were welcomed into the VIP room by Jay. Wanting to ensure Chris had privacy, Jay arranged a separate room for him. To Chris's surprise, the entertainment turned out to be Denise, an old school friend, making him uneasy. Hastily leaving the room, he informed his friend of his departure from the VIP area. Downstairs, he observed one of his friends betting on dice, but noticed the dealer swapping them. Despite his warnings, his friend, caught up in the thrill of winning, disregarded Chris's advice and lost. When Chris called out the dealer for cheating, security intervened, and, in the ensuing altercation, Chris ended up injuring 3 guards before being rendered unconscious. Upon awakening in a storage room, Chris found himself surrounded by 4 men, one of whom attempted to take his Special Forces tags. Reacting defensively, Chris struck one of them. The others restrained him while the man he hit decided to harm Chris with a cutter. Left for dead on a remote road, a passing trucker discovered him and rushed him to the hospital. The sheriff arrived at the hospital, where the doctor reassured Chris's parents of his strength, mentioning that a lesser person might not have survived his injuries. Seeking Chris's statement and a toxicology report, the sheriff's request upset Chris's sister, who urged him to focus on finding the culprits. Despite her objections, the sheriff explained that this was part of his duty before departing. Ray visited Chris in his weakened state, and despite the circumstances, Chris tried to maintain a brave front, joking about the ordeal being quite a homecoming. Ray, however, remarked that this place no longer felt like home. He criticized Jay's casino, believing it was eroding the moral foundation of the town by corrupting its inhabitants. After spending several weeks recovering, Chris found solace in the company of Pete and Ray as he regained his strength. Once back on his feet, he decided to gather supplies from town. Opening his garage, he discovered his father had diligently maintained his truck, anticipating his return. However, his trip into town left him unsettled as he observed the proliferation of adult stores and the casino's dominating role in the town's economy. To him, it signified a descent into moral decay. While unloading his truck, Jay pulled up in his white Jeep, offering an apology. He attributed the altercation to Chris's PTSD, stating it made his men uneasy, and assured Chris that the cheating dealer had been fired. Jay also mentioned that the security team had been reprimanded and proposed a job as head of security, but Chris swiftly declined. Despite leaving an envelope of cash for Chris, which Chris found offensive and returned without opening, he vowed to press charges. Yet, the sheriff dismissed his intentions, citing the casino's untouchable status as the town's primary revenue source, leaving Chris frustrated and ejected from the station. Back at home, as Chris hung up his car keys, Denise unexpectedly arrived, returning his jacket. During their conversation, Chris expressed disappointment in the sheriff's lack of justice. Denise suggested Chris run for sheriff himself, believing he could do a better job. Chris contemplated her words and inquired about her job at the casino. Her retort about the necessity of paying bills with her employment there drew judgment from Chris before she drove away. When Chris arrives home, he discovers his mother in tears, speaking frantically on the phone. The news hits hard. Pete is in trouble again. Chris rushes with his mother to the location, finding Pete in the grips of a crystal meth overdose. Determined to uncover the truth, Chris learns the dealers are Jay's security guards. Despite his father's attempt to stop him, Chris retrieves his gun and heads out, resolved to confront the situation. But as he reaches the casino, armed and ready, a moment of clarity strikes. He puts the gun aside, opting instead for a wooden log from his truck to wreak havoc on the casino, sending a message without using violence. However, this act lands him on trial, facing the consequences. Advised to take a deal, Chris chooses to defend himself. He passionately addresses the jury, asserting his innocence in anything other than standing up against Jay Hamilton's corrupt practices that plague their town. Displaying scars from his altercation with Jay's associates, Chris emphasizes the sheriff's negligence and vows to uphold justice if given the chance. The jury, moved by his conviction, unanimously acquits Chris. In the aftermath, Chris's campaign succeeds and he becomes the town's new sheriff. On his first day, armed with his signature wooden log, he makes a bold move, dismissing all deputies appointed by the previous corrupt sheriff. He immediately confronts Jay, pulling him over for a minor violation. Despite Jay's warnings, Chris fearlessly breaks his taillights with the log, sending a clear message that no one, not even Jay, is above the law. Chris enlists Ray as his deputy, seeking his insight on dismantling Jay's drug empire. Following Ray's lead, they start by targeting the dealers and gradually tracing the network to the suppliers. While most evade capture, they finally apprehend Booth, the individual responsible for injuring Chris and stealing his identification tags. During a search, Ray discovers incriminating evidence on Booth. Booth requests to contact his lawyer, but Chris and Ray have different plans. They insist on inspecting Booth's Chevrolet truck, extensively modified by him. Disregarding Booth's warnings of retaliation from his associates, Chris, though cautious, sends Ray to safeguard his family while he keeps watch over Booth at the station. During a lunch break at the station with a poorly made meal, Denise, offering a properly prepared lunch, surprises Chris. She reveals her departure from Jay's casino, easing Chris's worries. Amid their conversation, emotions escalate, and they give in to their long-held passions. In Chris's absence, Jade contacts the former sheriff, who arrives with 3 ex-deputies and destroys Chris's truck as payback, gleefully echoing Booth's sentiments. With a warning that Chris should have stayed silent, they opened fire on the sheriff's station. Reacting swiftly, Chris grabs Denise, seeking cover from the gunfire. Back at Chris's residence, a group of thugs breaks in, leading to a confrontation where one of them shoots Ray in the leg while he shields Pete. The remaining 2 thugs confine Chris's family to a room while Pete manages to escape. Hearing the turmoil, one thug investigates, only to be confronted and shot by Ray. The commotion alerts the 3rd thug, whom Ray bravely confronts. Meanwhile, at the sheriff's office, Chris creates an escape route by shooting a hole in the floor. He instructs Denise to crawl through the space underneath to safety and turns his attention to Booth. Chris strikes a deal with Booth, offering his release in exchange for information on the location of the drug lab. Booth discloses that the old mill serves as a cover for the lab. Chris releases Booth, but in the chaos of the ongoing fight, Booth rises at the wrong moment and is caught in the crossfire. Chris, taking the initiative, maneuvers under the floors to confront all three thugs at his home. After swiftly dealing with them, he hurries back to find Ray, who finally knocks out the last remaining thug. As Chris approaches Ray, intending to offer help, Ray mistakes him for another thug and lands a punch on Chris. Their distraction allows another thug to take them both hostage at gunpoint. In a split second, Chris's father intervenes, swiftly neutralizing the goon and securing the safety of the family. Once assured of their well-being, Chris rushes to the lumber mill for evidence, but Jay lies in wait, anticipating his arrival. Walking straight into Jay's trap, Chris faces a brutal beating, resulting in a fall that dislocates his left knee. Seeking refuge in the nearby forest, Chris resets his knee, but Jay relentlessly pursues him with an axe, intent on ending his life. Engaged in a fierce struggle, Jay initially gains the upper hand, exploiting Chris's injuries. Despite the odds, Chris manages to reverse the situation, seizing Jay in a chokehold. Breaking Jay's leg, Chris apprehends him for his multitude of crimes. Subsequently, Chris and Ray permanently shut down the casino, redirecting efforts toward reviving the lumber mill for the town's benefit. Thoughts on the aftermath spur contemplation as peace returns to Kitsap County after the turbulent events. Recalling the Dwayne Johnson film Walking Tall from 2004, it demonstrates the extent an individual will go to in order to ensure justice in their community. Chris fought really hard against corruption with his famous piece of wood, and we were all really interested to see what would happen.